This week on the other side, the eSafety Commissioner withdraws her action against Elon Musk's X platform. But no, she hasn't had a sudden wave of self-awareness and humility come over her. She's just going to fight in a more friendly, different environment. We'll tell you all about that and the dangers of Albo's planned censorship laws. The fallout from Donald Trump's lawfare conviction in the US will explain what actually happened and what it really means. Dr Fauci testifies before a congressional hearing in the US. We'll bring you all the detail on that. G'day Melbourne, g'day Broome, g'day Australia. This is episode 316 of The Other Side for the weekend commencing Friday, June 7, 2024. I'm Damien Curry. Welcome to the show that brings you a small government, classical liberal, centre-right view of the world and is totally open and transparent about that perspective, unlike that billion-dollar taxpayer-funded monster that we all know and love. We've got opinions, but we tell you where they're coming from so you don't make the mistake of thinking our opinions are the ultimate truth or anything. We try to get things right, but like everyone, our opinions can sometimes be wrong. We just want to make sure Australians like you have the chance to hear a range of different voices, not just the ones approved of by the mainstream media and the ABC. And that's why this show is called The Other Side. When it comes to meddling government bureaucrats trying to control us by using the excuse that they're keeping us safe, it doesn't come much more meddly than the Queen of Censorship, the head of Australia's highly unnecessary eSafety Commission, Julie Inman-Grant. The woman dubbed eKaren after her draconian overreach in attempting to impose a global, not national, but global ban on a rather important video that grown-up adult Australians might have needed to see so they could be adults and make their own minds up about the threats to our society. It was a video of a violent attack on a Sydney bishop. It wasn't pleasant, but it wasn't too graphic. It wasn't so bad that it needed to be censored. And it became very clear very quickly that the eSafety Office has zero interest whatsoever in protecting free speech or your right to know and see things that the government doesn't want you to know or see. And that is simply not okay. That is an overreach. The eSafety Commission was originally set up as the Children's eSafety Commission to protect kids online. But now under Labor, it's morphed into a censorship body for adults that nobody wants. Julie Inman-Grant had to abandon her case against Elon Musk and X in the federal court this week. But she's not giving in. She wants to fight via another channel, the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, the AAT, as she explained to an overly sympathetic ABC News this week.
After considering multiple litigations, the prudent use of public funds, and the phalanx of lawyers that X Corp has lined up in the federal court, we thought it made the most sense to have an independent test and of a merits review through the AAT of why we issued the Class 1 notice.
An independent test of a merits review. I love all this bureaucratic speech. It's just blah, 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 blah. Absolutely means nothing. Translation, we knew we were going to lose in the federal court, so we've changed tack. Not content that her agency's threats to impose obscene $750,000 a day fines on tech companies, not content that that isn't working, Inman-Grant is now pushing for, quote, business disruption powers. She wants the power to restrict the ability of X or any company to get advertising revenue as yet another punishment that she can wield, as if she doesn't have enough already with $750,000 a day fines. But she claims that despite all of that power that she wields and she has vested in her, and she talks about it as being, I am the commission, I am a statutory authority, she said once. She, despite all that power, apparently is the victim here. And that Elon Musk, by standing up to her, is the bully here. Okay,
I will not be cowed by those kinds of threats. I'm sure more will come. But I'm here to do the right thing, to keep Australians safe online, to use the powers that I have, and in fact, test the powers that I have.
Yes, that's what we're worried about, Julie. You and your powers and trying to keep us safe. A lot of us would really rather you didn't. But there's worse to come, with Albo considering even more laws to restrict online content.
It's a relief to know that the Online Safety Act review has been brought forward. These will ultimately be questions for government about what kind of enforcement powers they want to give us, but this is really an important test case.
Yep.
Yeah, it's such a relief. Such a relief that the government review has been brought forward. Oh, I'm so relieved by that. So are the smart boffins at the Institute of Public Affairs, by the way, who've done a little research into how online fact checkers and censors are going in terms of their ability to respect free speech and diversity of political opinions, and not to resort to excessive censorship when they do their little fact checks and keeping us safe. The IPA has this week called for the Albanese government's new misinformation and disinformation laws to be scrapped permanently. Here's John Story, the director of the IPA's Legal Rights Program.
Under these proposed new laws, social media companies must censor misinformation to the satisfaction of a government agency or face huge fines. A secret letter from the Communications Minister to the Prime Minister has revealed that fact-checking organisations will enforce the government's new censorship rules. This will give fact-checkers enormous power in determining what mainstream Australians will be allowed to say online. The IPA has analysed 970 fact-checking investigations dating back to January 2019. The research shows that Australia's main fact-checkers are consistently biased and disproportionately target critics of government policy and right-of-centre views. The research found that when the fact-checkers investigated comments made by Australian politicians, 65% of the time their verdicts favoured the political left. This is a huge 2-to-1 disparity.
Surprise! Who would have seen that coming? But it gets even better.
We also analysed how the fact-checkers approach policy debates like the responses to the COVID-19 pandemic and climate change policy. An overwhelming 94% of the fact-checking investigations about COVID-19 targeted critics of the official response to the pandemic. In the case of climate change, 81% of fact-checking investigations target skeptics of the climate change agenda. RMIT Fact Lab has never fact-checked a single claim made by an advocate of COVID-19 or climate change policy. Not a single one.
RMIT Fact Lab is just to be dismissed, right? It's just nonsense. 94% of the fact checkers on COVID-19 targeted critics of the government, and 81% of fact checkers targeted critics of the official climate change narrative. And that, folks, is all you need to know about why we must never allow the government to do its own censoring. Why free speech is such a fundamental principle of a liberal democracy. And that means false speech, offensive speech, and dangerous speech will sometimes have to be allowed to happen. Hopefully the light of truth and public ridicule will most often deal with those issues. But we do not need to empower government overlords with censorship powers, because they will not restrain themselves, as we've just seen. And they will inevitably abuse that power to silence critics.
A key principle of the International Fact-Checking Network, the private fact-checking accreditation body, is that signatories commit to non-partisanship and fairness, and to not concentrate their fact-checking unduly on any one side. Our research proves that this is clearly not the case in Australia. Rather, the fact-checkers are activist organisations pushing their own political agendas. If these organisations are empowered to define what constitutes misinformation, they will only censor critics of official government policies and the centre-right. The government's proposed misinformation and disinformation laws are the single biggest attack on freedom of speech in Australia's peacetime history and have no place in a liberal democracy like Australia.
Hear, hear. That's the IPA's Director of Law and Policy, John Story. And the IPA has been doing some fantastic work on this, so do jump on their website, the Institute of Public Affairs, if you want to find out more. We'll be keeping a close eye on this one for you too. So, all the pundits have been giving their opinions on the Trump guilty verdict all over the media this week, mainly focusing on the impact that it'll have on his campaign. The answer to that is simple. It's having a very positive impact. Why? Because most politics in the Western world today is not a battle between traditional right and traditional left. It's between government, bureaucrats and legal elites on one side, and the people who are sick of being controlled by the government, bureaucrats and legal elites on the other side. And most people don't care what Trump did as much as they care about the state going after him for what he did. Most people don't like dirty politics. They may not understand all the details, but they know when they smell a rat. And they don't like being taken for fools. All of this seems to be lost on the dopey leftists in the Democratic Party in America, who seem to think that people still care about what Donald Trump has done in the bedroom more than what he's done in the Oval Office when they're choosing their president. So Trump raised $200 million in 3 days after the guilty verdict. And the polls now have him just as strong as before and in some cases higher. Anyway, more of the fallout in a sec. But would you like to know what Trump was actually charged with and found guilty of in this little state of New York show trial? I would, so I found out, so I could share it with you. The mainstream media won't tell you because they wrongly think that you won't have the attention span for it or understand it. But they're just bad at explaining stuff and they don't have smart viewers like the people who watch this show. So here we go. Donald Trump was charged by the state of New York, a Democrat state, Democratic Party run state, with a Democrat elected district attorney by the name of Alvin Bragg. Bragg has been accused of campaigning on a platform of getting Trump. He constantly made references to his legal experiences with the Trump family during his campaign for his office back in 2019. Now, Trump was charged with knowingly falsifying business records relating to payments that he made to a lawyer who worked for him by the name of Michael Cohen. The prosecution claims that Trump had asked Cohen to pay the porn star Stormy Daniels $130,000 in hush money. That's money to stay quiet about having had sex with Trump before the 2016 election. Trump says he never had sex with Stormy Daniels. Stormy says she did have sex with Donald Trump. Stormy even went on TV and bragged about it. But she says it was all totally consensual.
But you say it's not a Me Too case.
It is not a Me Too case. I mean, I wasn't assaulted. I wasn't attacked or raped or coerced or blackmailed. They tried to shove me in the Me Too box to further their own agenda. And first of all, I didn't want any part of that because it's not the truth and I'm not a victim in that regard.
Okay, so she's a porn star. Nothing to gain whatsoever from claiming to have had sex with Donald Trump, except fame, money, notoriety, celebrity. Well, she has everything to gain. So she's already a pretty crappy witness. Fast forward 8 years, and Bill Maher, who's a left-wing TV show host who hates Trump, is forced to kind of point out that Stormy Daniels' testimony in this 2024 New York case didn't match up with what she said back then.
That's not what she's saying now. She's talking about he was bigger and blocking the way. It's all the Me Too buzzwords. She said there was a power imbalance of power for sure. My hands were shaking so hard. She said she blacked out. Blacked out? She's a porn star.
So now she's not just a crappy witness, she's a doubly crappy witness, a proven liar. So her testimony is worth absolutely nothing. Okay, so what have the prosecution got then? Well, they've got the lawyer himself, Michael Cohen, the guy that they claim paid the hush money to the porn star. Now, remember, Trump is not on trial for sleeping with a woman. He says he didn't sleep with her. But even if he did, you'll be pleased to know that that is not a crime in the United States of America, yet. People are still allowed to have sex without the government's approval. No, the crime is the hush money payments. Actually, no, it isn't. The hush money payment is not a crime in New York State. The charges were for falsifying business records. So what the heck's that got to do with all this? Well, let's explain how that happened a bit. The claim was that Trump hired Cohen to pay Daniels $130,000, right? Cohen says he paid for that out of his own pocket, and then he had to be reimbursed by the Trump Corporation. So Trump is on trial because when his company reimbursed Cohen, it didn't write on the books $130,000 for Michael Cohen to pay hush money to Stormy Daniels. Instead, they wrote retainer payment to Michael Cohen for legal services. Now, Trump's lawyers had the audacity to suggest that the payments to Cohen were actually for legal services. But never fear, the New York prosecutor has a star witness, Michael Cohen himself. Cohen was the only witness who testified that Trump knew about the true purpose of those reimbursements to him. There's just one little problem with all of this. Cohen hates Trump and he has an axe to grind. He's a tainted, super crappy witness because he wants revenge on Trump for not giving him a nice job. How do we know he wants revenge on Trump and is an unreliable, shoddy witness? Gee, I don't know. Oh, that's right, yes. He wrote a book about it, about Trump, called Revenge. And Cohen is selling another book now. He went on CNN this week to discuss the verdict and says it was good that Trump didn't give testimony himself.
Donald doesn't know how to tell the truth. His lies are compounded only by lies. You know the old expression, a lie begets a lie? Well, what happens when you've told 35,000 plus of them? He can't keep the story straight.
Right, okay. Only problem there is that Cohen himself spent more than a year in prison after pleading guilty to 9 federal crimes, and he was disbarred as a lawyer. Since getting out of jail, he's had his own podcast in which he constantly criticizes Trump. Oh yeah, and this is what he used to say about Trump.
He's a smart man. He's a decisive man. He's a swift-acting individual.
The words the media should be using to describe Mr. Trump are generous, compassionate, principled, empathetic, kind, humble, honest, and genuine.
Yeah, just a little bit inconsistent. So that's the star witness. In fact, the only witness to this terrible crime worthy of hauling a former American president before a judge and damaging the entire reputation of the United States and New York forevermore. But there were 34 counts. We've heard the media say it over and over and over again. He's been convicted of 34 counts of fraudulently messing with business documents. Not really. The payment to Cohen was spread across 11 smaller payments. So the New York prosecutors made a count for 11 checks, 11 invoices, and 12 ledger entries. Total, 34 counts. It was one alleged crime split into 34 little crimes for maximum dramatic, political, and PR effect. Anyway, the jurors decided to believe Cohen. And here's where it gets a bit legally technical. A felony in America is typically defined as a crime punishable by more than a year in jail, while a misdemeanor is usually an offence punishable only by fines or by short terms of imprisonment in local jails. In Trump's case, what he was accused of is only a felony if the misrepresentation of that business expense on the books was done by an offender intending to commit another crime or to aid or conceal another crime by falsifying records in the first place. And here's where things got really weird. The judge told the jury that they didn't need to agree on what that other crime might have been. They only had to agree unanimously that another crime might have been in the works, whatever they thought it might be. High-profile US criminal defense attorney Mark Geragos told Piers Morgan Uncensored this week that was very concerning.
There was no theory that was given to the jurors. The jurors were told it could have been campaign finance. It could have been tax. It could have been false books. They were told they didn't have to specify, and specifically told they did not have to agree unanimously. That's what irks me. Lifelong Democrat, no fan of Trump, never voted for Trump, never will. But I will tell you, as somebody who has spent his entire career with kind of taking on unpopular causes and holding the government accountable, I have to tell you, I do that for a reason. And the reason is this kind of shenanigans, and that's the best light I can spin it on in the criminal courts, has no place in a federal election.
No, I agree.
You'd have to be a pretty brainwashed anti-Trumper and quite ignorant to be blind to how much of a political setup this whole thing was. Also on the Piers Morgan show this week, we got to see such brainwashed ignorance.
Francesca, my question for you is, I understand how joyous you must be feeling that Donald Trump has been convicted because he slept with a porn star 20 years ago and may have shuffled some business papers about it. But why is it good for America that one of your 46 presidents has been treated in such a humiliating manner over something so trivial? And why do you guys not see that this might help him rather than hinder him in the election?
I happen to believe, Piers, that it's good for America when you hold the person who has the highest office in the land to the standards of the American law. And in this case, New York state law, where he committed these crimes. I happen to believe that it is a telltale sign of coming totalitarianism, fascism, skirting of the law when you allow a president to simply do whatever he wants and actually never hold him accountable.
Oh, that sounds so very noble. That's Francesca Fiorentini, a 40-year-old journalist who used to work for Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera is the Qatari-owned TV news network. She worked for their far left-wing AJ Plus digital channel, which is all over the place on social media that your kids are probably consuming, by the way. Brainwashing. That channel's aimed at young people in the West. They cover issues regularly, really important issues such as white fragility and toxic masculinity and other woke nonsense. Since then, she's appeared on the ultra-left-wing The Young Turks show online and occasionally the most extreme-left US cable news network, MSNBC. She doesn't seem to care about Bill Clinton's shenanigans or Joe and Hunter Biden's amazing ability to avoid any legal action over their unusual sideline business activities. Oh, and when it comes to the actual facts of the case against Trump, well, she kind of came a bit unstuck, shall we say, while debating the Daily Wire's Michael Knowles, who was also on the Piers Morgan panel. Watch this.
This has absolutely nothing to do with the law. As was noted earlier, at most you're talking about a misdemeanor that would have already expired under the statute of limitations. I'm not even convinced that there was really a misdemeanor that Trump committed. So my fellow panelist here is celebrating that the rule of law has been vindicated and overturned 234 years of American legal tradition. I would challenge her to see if she could possibly articulate how and what crime Trump committed, because so far Alvin Bragg, the DA, has failed to do so. The judge in the case, Judge Merchan, has failed to do so, and they can't do it because Trump didn't commit any of the crimes for which he's been convicted.
Francesca, just on that point, what crime did Trump commit?
It was financial crimes. It was white collar crimes.
What was it?
Exactly
Which
what
one,
they
though?
charged him. He was convicted on.
What was the crime?
It's New York state law.
I understand. What was the crime?
It is
Francesca, actually.
I don't even like it. It is.
Well, hang on, Mark.
He just got convicted on 34 counts.
Francesca, what was the crime?
Of like cooking the actual book.
What was the crime?
You are not allowed. So you are not allowed to use your own financial, like your own money to pay off somebody. And then he logged it as something different. He logged it as just a regular payment, but he was actually paying off this porn star to keep quiet, which if he hadn't been running for president would not have mattered, but he was. And so it impacted campaign finance laws in New York State. Okay, that is what Juan Merchan just oversaw this. Alvin Bragg brought these charges because
that's not quite what happened.
Okay.
To 3 years to do it.
Let's just go before Kevin. I'll be very, very, very patient. I will come to you.
Look, I'm no expert. Let me just say, hang on.
No,
Michael,
You are no expert.
by the
That's
way.
right. Because the campaign finance law is a federal law.
There's no doubt this case against Trump would never have been brought if not for the fact that there was a political motive. And in my opinion, that is the real crime here. That is election interference. That is abuse of the criminal justice system in a way that damages the institutions and conventions of the United States. And that is the work of the Democratic Party, not Donald Trump. And then there was this super creepy moment.
Mr. President, can you tell us, sir, Donald Trump refers to himself as a political prisoner and blames you directly. What's your response to that, sir? Do you think the conviction will have an impact on the campaign? We'd love to hear your thoughts, sir.
Should he be on the ballot, sir?
Weird stuff, that. Donald Trump gave his first interview after the guilty verdict to Fox News' Fox and Friends show.
These people are sick. They're sick. They're deranged. I talk about the enemy on the outside and the enemy from within. So you have Russia, you have China. But if you have a smart president, you always handle him. Quite easily, actually. We have a lot of advantages. But the enemy from within, they are doing damage to this country. They want open borders. They want high interest rates. They now want to quadruple your taxes. Quadruple. All my life I watched politics, and it was always like politicians want to lower taxes, not quadruple them. There's a whole sickness going on right now. The good news is that I think we've set a record beyond all records for fundraising. That's like a poll. And another one just came out just before I got in that we're 6 points higher than we were before. So I don't know if that holds up. I mean, I'm just not sure. But people get it. It's a scam. And the Republican Party is really, they've stuck. They stick together in this. They see it's weaponization of the Justice Department, of the FBI. And, that's all coming out of Washington. You may think it's brag. Take a look at who opened the case. I'm not allowed to talk about it because I have a gag order. I'm probably, I guess, the first presidential nominee and the leading crooked Joe by a lot that's not allowed to talk. Maybe they're doing me a big favor. Who knows? But I'm not allowed to talk. I'm gagged. Nobody's ever heard of it. It's all coming out. It's weaponization, and it's a very dangerous thing. We've never had that in this country. And, they have misinformation. Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. It's just words. He doesn't even know what it means. But it's like their slogan, I'm a threat to democracy. I'm the opposite. They're the threat to democracy.
Donald Trump speaking in his, that was very Mike Moore, that wasn't it? Donald Trump speaking in his first interview after the guilty verdict to Fox News, Fox and Friends show. America's top infectious disease official during the COVID crisis, Dr. Anthony Fauci, had to testify this week before the US House of Representatives subcommittee on the coronavirus pandemic. It was his first appearance before Congress since he retired in 2022.
During the hearing, House Democrats praised Dr. Fauci for saving countless lives during the COVID-19 pandemic.
I lost both of my parents during the pandemic, so I take this very personally. It's important to note that, in my opinion, is that you are an American hero and your team has done more to save lives than all 435 members of this body on both sides of the aisle.
That's US CBN News reporting there. But while some see Fauci as a hero, many see him as a man who led an inexcusable overreaction to COVID based on too little evidence.
Business closures. Early on, when 5,000 people were dying a day, yes. Church closures. Same thing. School closures. Again, the stay-at-home orders. These were important when we were trying to stop the tsunami of deaths that were occurring early on. How long you kept them going is debatable.
Tell that to Dan Andrews and a lot of the other Australian officials during COVID. He would have kept them going forever if he could have. Fauci was asked whether he thought the virus originated in the Wuhan lab, where his organisation, the US National Institute of Health, had been partly funding virus research, or whether it originated in nature via animal transmission. The World Health Organization, by the way, says both of those theories remain a possibility. But Fauci had previously ruled out the lab leak theory. Here's what he was asked this week by New York Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis of the Republican Party.
I just want to clarify for the record, because today you testified that you did not suppress the lab leak theory, yet in the past you have said, quote, it is a distortion of reality, unquote. You've said, quote, I've heard these conspiracy theories, and like all conspiracy theories, they're just conspiracy theories. That's what you told the American people. And so would you like to clarify what science were you following then versus now?
Yeah, no, I've also been very, very clear and said multiple times that I don't think the concept of there being a lab leak is inherently a conspiracy theory. What is conspiracy is the kind of distortions of that particular subject, like it was a lab leak and I was parachuted into the CIA like Jason Bourne and told the CIA that they should really not be talking about a lab leak.
Thank you.
That's the conspiracy.
Appreciate that.
So what he's saying there is that when he said that it was a conspiracy theory, the lab leak theory, and people who were pushing it or saying that it could have been a possibility were conspiracy theorists, that he wasn't really talking about that. He was talking about people who were making up more elaborate conspiracy theory, wacky type stories about him being connected to the CIA and stuff. That's actually just plain false. That's just not the truth. The truth is that he did call people conspiracy theorists if they even suggested that the virus could have come out of a lab. Fauci told the subcommittee hearing while being questioned by another congressman, Jim Jordan, that claims that he deliberately downplayed the possibility of a lab leak because of the fact that his institute was funding the Wuhan lab's research were completely false.
Did U.S. tax dollars flow through a grant recipient to the lab in China?
I'm sorry, what was?
Did U.S. tax dollars flow through a grant recipient to the lab in China?
Yes, of course. It was a sub-award to the Wuhan Institute.
And who approved that award?
Excuse me?
And who approved that award? What agency approved that award?
National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases.
Your agency approved that, right?
Yes, it did after.
Does that have anything to do with this downplaying of the lab leak theory?
No.
Nothing to do with it?
Nothing.
What do you agree that there was a push to downplay the lab leak theory?
Not on my part.
Really?
Really?
Wow.
Wow.
I think most of the country would find that amazing. I still got 11 seconds.
But look at the facts. I've kept an open mind throughout the entire process.
Early emails on likely origins of COVID between scientists from the NIH, which is Fauci's organisation, expressed concerns that gain-of-function research at Wuhan may have been the cause. Days later, though, the very same scientists changed their minds and said that zoological cause was the most likely, animal transfer. Gain-of-function research genetically alters an organism like a virus to enhance its biological functions. It might make a virus more deadly, it might make a virus more transmissible, or able to infect more species or hosts. They do it to better predict emerging infectious diseases and to develop vaccinations and medicines. It does have a purpose. But Dr. Fauci told the hearing that the viruses used in the research being funded in China were too distant to have been able to evolve into the COVID virus, SARS-CoV-2. He says it most likely was animal transmission, but he admits we have to keep an open mind because there's no definitive evidence either way. Senator Rand Paul, who has previously had sparring matches in Senate hearings with Dr. Fauci, told Fox News' Sean Hannity that he's not buying Fauci's claim that he didn't deliberately downplay the lab leak theory.
In the earliest months in January, aren't there emails that you've written about, talked about, that show just the opposite, that they were in a panic, that number one, they may have funded it, number two, they knew gain of function research took place and coronavirus research took place, and that they may have funded it?
Yeah, one of the very frightened emails he gets from an assistant in January of 2020 is an assistant saying, oh my goodness, this is gain of function research we funded. This is from his assistant. And they were worried about guilt. They were worried about culpability. They're worried that anybody's hands that touched the money, anybody who approved the money going to Wuhan would ultimately get blamed. So Fauci actually organized a paper called Proximal Origins. He had 5 virologists write the paper. Most of them were well rewarded with large grants. Christian Anderson got a $9 million grant about a month after this. Meanwhile, all of these people were privately saying, oh my goodness, it looks like it was manipulated. But publicly, they were saying it's a conspiracy theory. They went to Facebook. they suppressed it. They told Facebook, suppress the story of anything coming from the lab. It's all conspiracy theory.
Senator Paul told Sean Hannity that Dr. Fauci had never had the research at Wuhan approved by the Safety Committee. But he sent an email in January 2020 to the Safety Committee head to show his research that the virus most likely came from animals.
At 3 in the morning, Anthony Fauci sends an email to the head of the Safety Committee. The head of the Safety Committee should have seen this research, but never did. And he sends him an email saying, hey, nothing to see here. Here's a paper that says in all likelihood this came from animals, not from the lab. Why is he sending that to the head of the Safety Committee? Because the Safety Committee was never allowed to review this. For 3 years, I've been asking the NIH for the deliberations. If this is not gain of function, I want to see the discussion between the scientists. Fauci says all the scientists up and down, they all said it wasn't gain of function. Let me see the deliberations. I want to see the arguments for and against. They won't reveal this. They are tighter-lipped than the CIA on this, and the NIA has resisted really requests from Democrats and Republicans. The Democrat chair of my committee has co-signed this request. It's over a year old, and my individual requests are 3 years old. They have resisted, they have obscured, and according to Fauci's assistant that he threw under the bus today, David Morenz, according to him, it was a targeted cover-up and that they destroyed emails and evidence.
It's incredible. I mean, just pause on that for a moment, right? Because think about it. It is bureaucrats telling the elected officials, we're not going to do what you ask. We're not going to give you the documents you want to see. Even though you've got a Democrat and a Republican on a committee signing a thing saying, we want to see these documents. The bureaucrats, right? You don't have to go very deep to see the deep state, right? It's just the top level of bureaucrats saying, sorry, no. Sorry, politicians. Sorry, minister. You can't see this. And just blocking and doing all sorts of nasty things to prevent things. This is why big government gets very, very dangerous very, very quickly. There seems to be a lot of unanswered questions and attempts to keep them unanswered going on here. But Fauci has strongly rebuked any claims of a cover-up.
The accusation being circulated that I influenced these scientists to change their minds by bribing them with millions of dollars in grant money is absolutely false and simply preposterous.
Dr. Anthony Fauci testifying in Washington, D.C. this week. Also at the US Congressional Subcommittee hearings this week, Dr. Anthony Fauci defended social distancing, stay-at-home orders, mask mandates for young children, and other policies that he backed in the early weeks of the pandemic, saying it was all based on the science available at the time, including his recommended vaccine policies.
The vaccine saved millions of lives, and I want to thank you for your support and engagement on that. However, despite statements to the contrary, it did not stop transmission of the virus.
That is a complicated issue because in the beginning, the first iteration of the vaccines did have an effect, not 100%, not a high effect. They did prevent infection and subsequently, obviously, transmission. However, it's important to point out something that we did not know early on that became evident as the months went by is that the durability of protection against infection and hence transmission was relatively limited.
Yeah, it definitely had a positive effect for many people, especially those that were vulnerable. But we knew from the trials that people that got vaccinated still were subject to getting COVID. So was the COVID vaccine 100% effective?
I don't believe any vaccine is 100% effective.
But a Republican House representative from the state of Georgia, Rich McCormick, himself a medical doctor, says regardless of the efficacy of the vaccines, forced and coerced vaccine mandates and government overriding doctors and their patients' personal liberties are simply not excusable.
I'm probably the only member of Congress that actually treated patients during the pandemic from the very beginning to the very end of the pandemic, during night shifts in the ER. Thousands of patients during that time. And in 2020, I was censored. My medical license was threatened because I disagreed with bureaucrats. The United States government, for the first time, stepping in and taking the place of medical professionals as the experts in healthcare. Any dissent surrounding COVID-19 treatments, mask mandates, and any public policy surrounding the pandemic was immediately labeled as anti-science. I watched as public health officials and politicians told my patients what treatment options were best for them, regardless of their comorbidities or their medical history. Despite my education and my training and my experience, my opinions were relegated to conspiracy and misinformation by so-called healthcare experts who had never treated a patient throughout the entire pandemic. The American people deserve to make medical decisions through conversations with their physicians rather than politically motivated mandates. Dr. Fauci, did you ever treat a patient for COVID during the pandemic?
I was part of a team that was at the NIH that took care. We didn't take care of many of them.
Okay, so not hands-on. Got it. Thank you.
Dr. McCormick's anger is shared by many doctors around the world who were shut down and hamstrung by health bureaucrats, something that happened widely in Australia, as doctors were banned from treating patients how they saw fit and were threatened with loss of their license to practice, even if they freely spoke out against the government orders. So what are we doing in Australia to make sure that never happens again? Nothing, it would seem. Anyway, back to the US Congress and Congressman Dr. McCormick's questioning of Anthony Fauci.
Why would the government, who has never treated a patient for COVID, you can read all the things you want, but you're not there. You're not seeing patients. You're not watching people die, intubating patients right there with that disease in your face, watching it happen, watching the development of this disease and actually learning from it. But I'm being told by bureaucrats what's right and wrong. And what's funny is everything I was censored on, I was proven to be right. Pretty crazy, isn't it? You said in an interview that you gave as part of an audiobook written by Michael Spector that you believed an institutional should make it hard for people to live their lives so they'd feel pressured to get vaccinated.
Once people feel empowered and protected legally, you were going to have schools, universities, and colleges are going to say, you want to come to this college, buddy? You're going to get vaccinated. Lady, you're going to get vaccinated. Yeah. Big corporations like Amazon and Facebook and all of those others are going to say, you want to work for us, you get vaccinated. And it's been proven that when you make it difficult for people in their lives, they lose their ideological bullshit and they get vaccinated.
Wow. Fancy calling the idea of people wanting to make their own medical choices about vaccination, of basic civil liberties, ideological bullshit. I'm sorry, I know Dr. Fauci was under pressure at that period during COVID, but he could have shown some humility, do you think? But he just never seems to. This is undoubtedly a very good example of a bureaucrat a little too happy to wield their power without regard to fundamental principles of liberty. Which I'm sorry, if I was running a dating service, I'd probably try and hook him up with eKarens. But anyway, I'm sorry, mate. This is not ideological bullshit, right? It's very important to the fundamentals of our liberal democracies. It's sadly the case that arrogance was something that we saw time and time again among health bureaucrats and politicians here in Australia too.
Are all objections to COVID vaccinations ideological bullshit, Dr. Fauci?
No, they're not, and that's not what I was referring to.
Well, in reference to making it hard for people to get education, traveling, working, I'd say it very much was in context. And I take great offense to this. Miss Allison Williams testified before this committee about losing her job because she sought an exemption for ESPN's vaccine mandate, which came from recommendations from bureaucrats like yourself. She and her husband were actively working with a fertility expert, a physician, on how to get pregnant, and agreed with the premise that she was young, healthy, wanted to get pregnant, and shouldn't get the vaccination for medical purposes. But she was fired because you made it hard, just like you said in your statement, because you didn't want to make sure that the ideological bullshit got in the way of her working, of living her life, of making a medical decision with her healthcare professional. I think America should take great offense to this. That's exactly what you meant when you said making it hard for people to live.
Yeah, you can't deny that. No matter what you think about the vaccines themselves, the mandate, the forcing of people to take them was unforgivable, and we desperately need laws to prevent coerced or forced vaccinations.
You affected people's ability to work, travel, be educated, to actually flourish in American society, to self-determine, as we're all given God-given rights. Shame on you. Dr. Fauci, you've become Dr. Fear. Americans do not hate science. I don't hate science. The American people hate having their freedoms taken from them. You inspired and created fear through mass mandates, school closures, vaccine mandates that have destroyed the American people's trust in our public health institutions. This fear you created will continue to have ripple effects over generations to come. You have already seen its effects in education, in the economy, and everything else. Quite frankly, you said, if you disagree with me, you disagree with science. Dr. Fauci, I disagree with you because I disagree with fear.
That's the Republican member of the House of Representatives in the US, Rich McCormick, himself a medical doctor, giving Dr. Fauci a piece of his mind. And I hope Australian politicians and CHOs are also listening and reflecting and learning. A couple of weeks back on the show, we spent a fair bit of time talking about those arrest warrants being sought by the International Criminal Court's top prosecutor, not just for the leaders of Hamas, but also for the leaders of Israel. World leaders widely condemned the move, saying the court was drawing a false moral equivalence between Hamas and Israel, one being a terrorist organisation and one being a government of a legitimate democratic state. While the vast majority of you agreed with that position, we got some comments on social media that put a different point of view, like this one. Oh please, all this playing the high moral ground on the basis of statehood is utterly disgusting. To say or believe that anyone, state or person, is above the law due to their legality is a joke. If you're committing atrocities, you're a criminal. That's it. Full stop. Israel is committing war crimes. And this one. I support Israel, but Netanyahu is committing genocide. You would have to be blind not to see that, mate. Now, these comments, and we welcome all polite comments on this show, by the way, so do not stop disagreeing and debating. That is what this show is all about. Keep those comments coming as long as they're respectful and interesting and thoughtful and smart. We love it. But those comments were in the minority. They do, however, demonstrate the theme of most of the case against Israel. We hear the term genocide being used a lot, and we hear the term war crimes being used a lot. The case for the idea that Israel is committing genocide was made this week by a group in the US called the University Network for Human Rights. They say that between October 7 and May 1, Israel's killed at least 34,000 Palestinians and injured over 78,000. Now, those figures, of course, are disputed by many. But according to this group, in this study, they say that in total that equals 5% of the Gazan population. They argue that over 75% of Gaza's population has been forcibly displaced in violation of Geneva Convention rules, most of them facing acute hunger and many dying of famine. In addition, they say Israel has destroyed over 70% of housing in Gaza. And all of this factual evidence supports the elements of genocide. But Joe Biden said last week that Israel is not committing genocide. The case for that view, that Israel is not committing genocide, according to Alon Ben Meyer, a retired professor of international relations from the Center for Global Affairs at New York University, is that the UN defines genocide as acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group. But the intention of this war is to eliminate Hamas terrorists, not the civilian population of Gaza, he says. But how can Israel justify attacks like an Israeli airstrike in Rafah on May 26, which hit a camp sheltering displaced civilians, killing at least 46 of them? Or the attack that's just happened on that school? Well, Professor Ben Meyer says in the Jerusalem Post that as horrific as war can be, even those attacks don't mean genocide, because Israel has no intention of destroying the Palestinians in whole or in part. He says Israel is not committing genocide against the Palestinians, but he writes that unless they embrace humanity and peaceful coexistence, the continuing violent conflict and losses on both sides will be tantamount to nothing less than mutual suicide. Let's hope he's not right there. You could argue that the people who are actually calling for genocide are those who chant from the river to the sea and believe that Israel has no right to exist and that the Jewish people have no claim to that land. That's a position that's simply not morally defensible or legally defensible if you actually do look at the history. People say, this didn't start on October 7. No, but I think October 7 changed everything. But okay, let's go back in history. You want us to go back to the 1940s and the Zionist movement to establish the Jewish state to give the Jews that had fled all around the world a homeland. That was brutal for many Palestinians who lost their homes and land, and there were injustices committed. But we also have to go back further in history to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was the greatest Islamic empire ever. It started in 1299 AD and it finished after the end of World War I. More than 600 years it lasted. It was governed by Islamic principles and its rulers held the title of Caliph, which signified their leadership within the Muslim world. The Ottomans promoted Islam as the state religion and established Sharia law as the basis for governance. Here's a quick clip from the excellent YouTube channel Simply Explained.
By 1517, under the rule of Sultan Selim I, the Ottoman Empire conquered Egypt, Syria, Arabia, and Palestine in a very short period. In 1914, the Ottoman Empire entered World War I on the side of the Central Powers, and they were defeated in October 1918. The remaining lands of the empire became the Republic of Turkey under the governments of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk on October 29, 1923.
Now, things weren't great for the Jews and the Christians under Islamic rule, but the Ottomans practiced a policy of religious tolerance known as the millet system, which allowed some Christians and Jews to govern their own internal affairs. But it varied from place to place, and they were officially second-class citizens. Abe Hamra is a Syrian-born Jewish guy who lives in the US. He's advocated for a long time that Jews living in Arab countries, like Jews from Syria, need to tell their history better. He appeared this week on the podcast of the impressionist and comedian Ami Kozak, Ami's House. You may know Ami from his excellent Jordan Peterson and Donald Trump impersonations. Anyway, Abe Hamra gives some really good insights from an Arab Jewish perspective.
I've been on this for the last 4 years. And I've almost started an organization to amplify the stories of the Jews in the Middle East and Arab countries in Iran.
You started
4 years. Yeah.
What was it called?
Uprooted.
Uprooted. Okay.
And it really didn't go places. People are like, what are you doing? We're not victims. Why do we need to tell our story? Oh, there's a million organizations fighting anti-Semitism. And I was blowing the whistle on anti-Semitism coming from the left and DEI groups over and over again and saying, listen, if you guys want to really fight this anti-Zionist anti-Semitism, you need to amplify voices of Jews from Arab countries, because their existence completely tears a hole in the entire fabric of bullshit that the Palestinian side is proposing, right? Their entire premise is that you believe that the Jew is a white supremacist. That is why at every protest, at the Palestinian protest, when there's a counter-Jewish protester, what do they say? Go to Poland, go to Germany. It is so entrenched and ingrained in that narrative that our existence, and something I've been planning to do for a long time, was do an all-Arabic pro-Israel rally and to counter them. Our existence completely starts tearing holes in that story.
Abe Hamra says that European Jews, what they call Ashkenazi Jews, should not only justify the existence of Israel on the need for a Jewish homeland after the Holocaust, but as a fundamental entitlement of the Jewish people as indigenous to the land. He says Ashkenazi Jews should be telling a more detailed story about the historical truth of the region.
And they playing right into the hand of the pro-Palestinian side, where they're saying, think about it. Everybody like, well, we need a safe place. We need a safe haven. After the Holocaust, we needed somewhere. It was Israel.
And you don't like that argument, or you find it to be
disingenuous, because that's not why we have Israel. I mean, sure, we need a safe place, but that's not why we have our holy land. That's not why it's important to us, let me say. That's what I meant to say. That's not why it is the most important, and that is not why it's ancestral.
And that's not why Israel's owed to us.
No.
It's because it's ours. And we're indigenous, is what you mean.
So if now
Sorry,
you bring out Jewish voices of Arab countries to speak out, they can have the same argument that the Ashkenazi community had in the earlier 60s and 70s, right? And they can say, or whatever, they can say, look, this type of anti-Zionist anti-Semitism was the main contributing factor to our displacement from Arab countries in Iran. This caused the ethnic cleansing of 850,000 to 1 million Jewish refugees. If this continues in this country, you are threatening us with the same thing that displaced us.
That's activist Abe Humra on the Army's House podcast. Well worth checking out the whole thing. So all the woke left jargon of colonialism and indigenous is garbage. There's cries of, oh, this didn't start on October 7. You need to understand and study the history. No, you need to understand and study the history. Both sides have a claim to that region. That's why almost the whole world supported a two-state solution up until October 7. But Hamas has now stuffed it all up. October 7 did change everything. Israel has always had every right to exist, and we must help it defend itself from terror and lies and nonsense. Another criticism that we've copped online is that we're pushing Israeli propaganda on this show. Listen, I want you to know that everything you see on this show comes out of my silly little head. And on this issue, I'm naturally inclined to support Israel, yes, because it, like Australia, is a democracy and shares most of our values and traditions of the Western world. But this is bloody hard stuff. And I'm, like you, learning as we go here because I have no Jewish background. So you can disagree with me, you can debate, we welcome all of that, but I assure you that nobody is pulling my strings. We're not even a financial operation yet. We will be soon, I hope, or else we'll be ceasing to exist. But even when we become financially viable and have sponsors on this show, we will remain editorially completely independent, as we are right now of everyone, including the ADH platform, who've never encroached or ever tried to encroach on the editorial integrity and independence of this show. I just write what I believe at the time to be right. It'll help us all learn and get a little closer to understanding stuff. And I'm open to changing my mind on things. But the more I dig into the history and the alleged conspiracies about Israel and the Jewish people, I'm afraid the more I'm convinced that most of it is just nonsense. This war is one of civilization against barbarism. Now, we don't have time this week, but next week we'll go a bit deeper on things and what strategies might be at play. And that is all we have time for this week on The Other Side. Please remember to follow us on Twitter, X and YouTube at Other Side Oz. That's at Other Side AUS, not OZ or anything stupid like that. They are our two main social media platforms, and please smash that like, subscribe and every other button on all the platforms that you possibly can. And please do make comments. That also helps with the magical algorithms that we're all controlled by. And of course, the best place to join us is right here on ADH TV at adh.tv on any web browser. And it's completely free. And when you sign up on ADH, then you get all our other great content. Alexandra Marshall, Daisy Cousins, Spectator TV, Nick Cater, Church and State with Dave Pello, and all the special events up there for you to watch on demand as well. We'll catch you next week on The Other Side for a brand new show. We drop a new one every Friday night at 8 p.m. I'm Damien Curry. Bye for now.